Adventures of Ellen White and the Pioneers. A message for Ella.
Suppose that Mrs. White were living today and she wrote an important message just especially for you. What do you think she'd say? Well, today's story is about a message that Mrs. White wrote to a girl 14 years old. This girl was her own granddaughter, Ella. She was still living until quite recently, and she's known as Mrs. Ella Robinson. And she's written a book called Stories of My Grandmother. Some of Mrs. White's visions were given for important people in the Advent message, such as conference presidents or managers of sanitariums or publishing houses and colleges. Others were given for ministers, teachers, doctors, and mothers and fathers. And although most of the visions were for adults, she was given some messages especially for children. Ella was living in Australia with her family and her grandmother, Ellen White. And Ella had just returned home from attending night school that was being conducted for students who worked during the day to earn money so they could attend our college known as Avondale. That was the story about the school in the previous story we just heard. Do you remember about that mysterious furrow? Well, that night, after returning home from her classes, Ella knelt beside her bed to pray. She realized that she was not as close to Jesus as she'd been 3 years ago when she'd been baptized, and so she asked the Lord to help her that she might have again peace and joy in her heart. But it seemed to her that her prayers reached no higher than the ceiling of the room, and she felt like she was drifting further and further away from God. And after she'd prayed for a long time, she got into bed, and with tears running down onto her pillow, she said, "Please, Lord, help me correct what is wrong, that I may once more enjoy your smile of approval." The next afternoon, Ella's grandmother, Mrs. White, came to their house in her carriage. She did not greet the family in her usual cheery manner, but she said very seriously to Ella's mother, "I want Willie to call his family together, for I have something to say to them." Willie was Mrs. White's son. And soon all the family was seated in the parlour with Grandma White. Ella and Mabel, her younger sister, each held one of their twin baby brothers. But Grandma White said, "Will someone take care of the twins? I want Ella and Mabel to give me all of their attention, for I have a solemn message for them." Then Mrs. White took several pieces of paper from a small satchel in which she carried her writings, and she began to read to them what she had written that very morning. She said, "I was unable to sleep after 11 o'clock, and in the night season I was instructed of God, and one stood by me and spoke." Mrs. White had seen the whole family in the vision, and she told Ella's parents there was confusion in their home. There was too much noise and too much forgetfulness of God in doing the daily duties of the household. And she was told to tell the children they needed to spend much more time studying the Bible. Can it be possible, thought Ella, that God has sent his angel from heaven with a message just for us? Mrs. White's instructions continued. The children, she said, should understand that part of their education should be to learn to do the little duties of life well. Mrs. White continued reading. Let a living faith run like threads of gold through the daily experiences in the performance of the little duties. Whatsoever you do, do all to the glory of God. And then there will be a looking unto Jesus, and love for him will be the continual motive, giving a vital force to everything that we do. The girls, she said, must improve in forming organized habits and in keeping their clothing clean and neatly mended. Ella and Mabel looked at each other. Oh, how they did not like to sit and mend stockings and mend dresses. But of course God knew this, and He wanted to help them. And as Ella listened to her grandmother read, she realized that most of the vision was meant especially for her. In fact, her name was mentioned several times. She was told that it was her duty to set a right example for her younger sister by being a real, living Christian in the home, faithful in all the little duties of home life, and not waiting for her mother to tell her what she should do. Mrs. White looked right at her granddaughters as she read, "Let your first work be to see that everything in your own room is put in order, the dirt and dust carefully removed. God is sad about the habits that you are forming. Form correct habits, now, even in dress. Let your appearance be neat and attractive, for the angels of heaven are taking notice of all these things. You will not neglect the little things to be done to give a neat, wholesome appearance, even to the kitchen. He that is faithful in that which is least is faithful also in much." After Mrs. White finished reading the long letter, she gave it to the family and said, "This is the message I have been bidden to give to you. I counsel you all to take heed of it." Ella and her sister were told that they did not need to be discouraged, that the angels were watching over them to see how they could help them and help them to develop Christ-like characters. Ella's first reaction to the testimony was one of bitterness and resentfulness, and she ran upstairs to her room and buried her face in her pillow and cried. Why did she have to spend so much time sweeping and scrubbing and washing the dishes? She wanted more time to study, and she wanted to make higher grades in her night school classes. And then suddenly, as if lightning had struck her, she remembered something. What was it that she'd prayed for the night before? She had prayed and asked God for help. And now this message must be the direct answer to her prayer. Yes, the great God of heaven had heard the prayer of a young girl and had sent His angel to show her what was wrong with her life. God did love her, and He had sent this special message of reproof because He loved her, and He even mentioned Ella and Mabel by name. And as these thoughts came to her, tears of sorrow and repentance took the place of those rebellious, upset tears that had fallen a few moments before. And she knelt in the same place that she had prayed the night before, when she had felt forsaken and forgotten by God. And now she knew that He had not forsaken her, and she was so grateful to think that the great God who rules the universe was thinking about her, a young girl who had wandered away from Him. He wanted to have her with Him in heaven, and so He sent His angel to help her find the way back. And suddenly Ella remembered about a saucepan that she had left soaking, well hidden behind the kitchen stove. And when she was sure that no one would see her, she took out that pan and she scrubbed and cleaned it. And she looked around the kitchen, and she could now see several things that needed to be done. And she gave the table a good scrubbing, and she threw out a piece of old withered pumpkin, and she tidied up the whole kitchen. And as she worked, she thought of the verse that her grandmother Ellen White had repeated in her message. He that is faithful in that which is least is faithful also in much. And she decided that from then on she was going to keep the kitchen clean and neat. For a while Ella was ashamed to have anyone know how she had been reproved by an angel, until she realized that the message which helped her when she was discouraged would also be a good message for other young people who are tempted to be lazy and neglect their work and think that no one sees. The angels see when we do not do our duty, but they also see when we do our duty well. Ella liked that verse. He that is faithful in that which is least is faithful also in much. And Ella made a promise to herself. Hereafter I shall try to do every task as carefully and faithfully as though I could look up and see Jesus observing everything I do. This is a good promise for each one of us to make also. Let me read Ella's promise again so that we can think about it seriously. Hereafter I shall try to do every task as carefully and faithfully as though I could look up and see Jesus delighting. Come and join us next time to hear about the forgotten vision and the forgotten letter.